Snortius was once again victorious. Easton had fallen, and the Greenskins achieved victory with only a few losses. Notably, the aspiring Weird Boy Double D, Red Shirt 5, and the Burner Snot Soggy and Snore Sleeper had gone to the big war in the sky. But with victory in the east, a great threat arose in the west as a chimera, an infantry fighting vehicle, rumbled down the road towards Megahumieopolis. It was not a quiet vehicle, and it kicked up an enormous dust cloud as it chugged towards its target. The Greenskins were well aware of its approach, and they took decisive action. They would lay an ambush for the Humies, and they left the gate invitingly open to tempt the Humies inside. Of the Humies present, there was, of course, DeBrain, who was still working on his mysterious project in his workshop. He had little to do with the planning process, and mostly wanted to be left alone to his work. The other Greenskins didn't dare pester the smart boy, lest they somehow gruesomely end up as part of his design. The Grot defenders of Megahumieopolis were as follows: Two Heads, Ostwald, Punchin' Bag 2, Morkius, Stressball, Crumplestein's Monster, Crumpy, and Freeloader. Among the orcs were Humius, Noogie Boy, and Orkius 2, with Orkius 2 being the biggest among them, so he was acting boss in Snortius's absence. The Greenskins had relatively low numbers, and no heavy equipment or anti-armor weapons to speak of. Orkius's only hope was to catch the Humies off guard in this ambush and attempt to disable the tracks on the Chimera.
"We's doing this all sneaky, boys. The weedy gate ain't gonna stop 'em no ways, so we just let 'em in. We hide, all cunning like in, the tall stuff in the fields. Then we jump 'em. Orcs do the jumping, Grots hide in the buildings and do the shooting."
With that, Orkius, Humius, and Noogie Boy took their positions near the entrance gate amongst the tall crops in the fields of Megahumieopolis. Orkius was an uncharacteristically patient orc. Slowly but surely the dull green chimera chugged its way towards the Greenskin settlement. Orkius's eyes widened at the sight of the machine. Oh, what a fabulous piece of loot! He was positively drooling over the twin heavy bolters mounted onto it. But how to get in? The orcs waited to see what would happen as the chimera stopped just outside the gate of Megahumieopolis. The Humie boys inside began to dismount. There were 12 of them. Not that most of the Greenskins could count that high, but they wore bright blue uniforms with nifty silver buttons, shiny black boots, and tall hats with short plumes in the front. These Humies looked like flash kits, except for their shooters, which were distinctly puny by comparison. Orkius readied his own shooter and prepared to attack. Humius, who had absolutely no such patience, gave a loud battle cry and began firing wildly at the dismounting infantry.
"Whoa! Ducka, 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 ducka!"
Unfortunately for the Greenskins, Humius was far too interested in making a great deal of noise than he was in actually aiming what he was firing at. Bullets skipped across the dirt road, kicking up small clouds of dust with each shot. The Humies began shouting as they spread out and began to take cover. Orkius rolled his eyes and fired his own shooter. It would be overstating it a bit to say that he was actually aiming his shooter, but he was much more careful than Humeus and made certain that his shooter was at least consistently facing the Humies and not simply sweeping wildly back and forth. Humeus was rewarded for his relative care as his Daka ripped through one of the hapless Humie PDF soldiers, who fell face first into the dirt. Noogie Boy tried next. Unfortunately, Orcius remained the only accurate orc, as Noogie Boy was also a little overexcited to be engaging in glorious combat. He also missed the fancily dressed Humies that were going to ground. Then it was the Grot's turn. Ostwald took his own shot as the first greenskin to actually aim before he fired, and was rewarded with a second Humie tumbling into the dust as the Grot cackled in delight. Punchin' Bag 2 was the only one to be out in the open when the fight with the Humies began. Not because he was particularly brave, but because he was fairly dim and hadn't paid much attention when all the other greenskins were taking cover or finding good shooting positions. Punchin' Bag was surprised to suddenly see Humies arrive. He had no weapon, no armor, but he did what he could. He picked up a rock, and he hurled it at a nearby Humie. It struck home. But rocks flung by tiny greenskins weren't the most effective weapons for penetrating the flak armor beneath their fancy uniforms, and it bounced harmlessly off. Morcius, Crumplestein's monster, Stress Ball, and Freeloader all began firing as well. In the rain of Daka and Las blasts, another Humie fell, bringing the total of dismounted infantry down to 9. After the initial burst of fire, a pack of 12 Squigs burst out from the crops, attracted by the sound of the fighting. Their teeth gnash as they growl and scramble towards the tasty Humies. The PDF fighters began to fall back on their training as they took cover and prepared to fight back against the ambush. Meanwhile, DeBrain was nearing completion of his project in his workshop. Yes. Soon I will have my ultimate weapon. I will do what no greenskin has ever done before. Figure out a way to make you useful, Stinky. Bright, flashing lights could be seen from the windows of the shop, and the sounds of grinding gears and pumping pistons could be heard by the greenskins over the din of battle. Something was coming. The Humies were doing their best to return fire. Many of them were pinned in place and had trouble raising their heads high enough to fire their weapons effectively. Many of the shots went wide, but a few found their mark. The Humies largely ignored Punchin' Bag 2, as he appeared to be unarmed, and began firing on the other grot positions in the houses. 2 lucky shots rang out. Morcius was struck, and he tumbled forward out of the second-story window he was shooting from, and plummeted to the ground. An even more lucky shot found its mark on Stress Ball, as his head was struck and immediately vaporized by the blast. And now it was time for the Chimera itself to respond with its heavy bolters. Deafening bursts of fire erupted from the machine. Clouds of shot raked across the battlefield. Fortunately for the greenskins, the gunner chose to target the attacking Squigs to prevent them from overrunning their position. With a long, concentrated blast of fire, the Squig pack was quickly reduced to little more than a fine red mist. The greenskins coveted that power and were eager to claim the Chimera as their own. If only they could get into it without getting shot, of course. With the ambush and the element of surprise, the greenskins had managed to down 3 of the Humies. But the Humie response killed 2 grots and an entire pack of Squigs. If they didn't eliminate the Chimera, this battle could very easily turn against the orcs. It was at that moment that the door of DeBrain's workshop burst open. Standing in the shattered doorway was a hulking killer can. One arm carried a deadly grabby claw, while a big shooter was mounted on the other side. Sitting on top was the remains of poor Carl, who had brutally been converted into some sort of mounted gun servitor to provide additional firepower to the war machine. The Brain stood next to him, his long las at the ready, as a familiar voice rang out.
"Look at me, Narf! I'm so big and stompy now! Let me out those Humies, sort!"
Stinky trundled off towards the Humie firing lines, his big shooter firing wildly. One unfortunate Humie raised his head to fire at the wrong time and was mowed down in a hail of gory Daka. The Brain laughed maniacally as his creation wrought havoc on the battlefield. But he noticed that the big shooter mounted on Carl was not active. Fire, you useless pile of scrap. Despite extensive neurosurgery to render Carl subservient to Stinky's controlling central nervous system, Carl simply refused to fire on his fellow humans. His face contorted as he refused to follow the command to fire. His muscles strained and his gears began to grind as he fought the programming. The Brain was furious as he kicked Carl right in the head, hoping to disorient the servitor enough for the neural suppressors to take over again. But this merely caused the servitor to malfunction further, spasming and flailing instead of functioning properly. With the arrival of the killer can, the orcs got their blood up and were ready to get properly stuck in. The Grots kept the Humies suppressed as the orcs prepared their charge. Orcius led them with a mighty roar! Unfortunately for him, as he sprinted out from cover, he ended up slipping slightly on the carcass of one of the butchered Squigs and stumbled a bit, allowing Humius and Noogie Boy to reach the Humies first. Noogie Boy dove in, wielding a mighty chain fist on the first Humie, who fired a few rounds wildly as he tried to scramble to his feet. The orc messily drove his fist right into the Humie's head, delivering a lethal noogie. Humius wielded a mighty two-handed chainsword as he launched himself at another soldier, hacking him to pieces as the orcs began their rampage. To the credit of the Humies, they did not break. Despite having shots rain down on them from the Grots and the orcs beginning to rip through their ranks, they dutifully returned fire. Orcius was shot in the chest, knocking him back and staggering him. Two Heads raised his weapon to fire out of the window when a precise las blast cleanly shot off one of his heads. The unfortunate Grot fell to the ground twitching, as his body was not accustomed to being run by only one brain. He was promptly renamed One Head. Crumpy did not have the luxury of a second head, and as his first and only one was blown off, he was added as another casualty of the Orc forces. There was one remarkable bit of luck for the Orcs, though. The Chimera decided to focus on the approaching killer can with all of its Daka. The mighty bolter rounds failed to penetrate and bounced off the thick can armor as it ambled forward.
"No! That tickles!
Whatever the Humies were expecting, it wasn't this level of resistance. The Chimera positioned itself in front of the dismounted infantry and dropped its hatch, hoping to get everyone inside to flee. The Orcs were not keen on the Humies legging it right after the fight just got started. It was downright unsporting and gettish of them.
Blow the treads! Use the Brain's bombs!
Orpheus, of course, was referring to the crude bombs that were developed by DeBrain before he undertook his Killer Can project. Orpheus, Noogie Boy, and Humeus hurled their bombs at the Chimera, attempting to disable its treads. Unfortunately for the Greenskins, the small explosives weren't able to get a solid hit on them.
Don't let it get away!
Stinky neared the Chimera and turned his attention to the vehicle. The brain was still trying to get Coral to function properly. "Defy me, will you?" The grot increased power to Coral's neurosuppressor, and suddenly the servitor snapped to attention and began operating his big shooter properly, turning it on the Chimera and riddling it with heavy Daka, damaging the side armor. Stinky quickly closed the gap on the transport, waving his claw maniacally.
"Oh, I'm so big and stumpy. Time to rip open his Yumi can, Troz."
With that, Stinky sunk his grabby claw into the side of the Chimera and easily ripped the tread clean off, immobilizing the vehicle. There was no escape for the Humies now. The grots opened fire on the remaining soldiers. A few of them panicked and started to flee. Punchin' Bag 2 and Freeloader each managed to gun down one of the Humies. Crumplestein's monster scored another wound on one. Things were indeed looking grim for the Humies. But there was something about Humies that all greenskins should understand. As often as Humies turn coward and run, there are some times when they seem like they're about to roll over and die, that they start to put up the biggest fights. Stinky was clinging to the Chimera, looking to rip into it even further with his grabby claw as the gunner inside tried to bring his heavy bolter to bear on the can. The gun jammed for a moment, unable to wheel all the way over to get a clean shot on Stinky. But with a desperate kick and an oath sworn to the Omnisire, the machine spirit relented, and the gun swung around and fired into Stinky at point-blank range. The heavy caliber bolts ripped into the scrap metal body of the can. The brain barely managed to leap free from the can as it was torn in two by the sheer volume and power of the bolt rounds. The remains of the can collapsed to the ground as the Humies cheered, and against all odds, they began to rally. Las blasts answered the grot's back as Oswald was killed. One of the Humies finally noticed Punchin' Bag 2 standing awkwardly in the open and shot him down as well. Crumplestein's monster was hit, a las blast striking directly into his shooting arm as he was knocked off his feet and out of the battle. The Chimera began attempting to close its hatch, giving up on any effort to rescue any of the remaining Humies as the tread had been ripped loose. They would stand here, or they would die here. Orpheus saw a chance to get inside the metal contraption, and between himself, Humeus, and Noogie Boy, they were able to stop the ramp from closing and wedge themselves into the transport. Humeus didn't waste a moment, and promptly stabbed the gunner to prevent any more greenskins from being daka'd. The driver pulled out a las pistol and fired it into Humeus, who was blasted off his feet, but clung to life. Orpheus seemed pleased with this development.
"Finally! I ain't got a chance to kill nothing so far. Come here, you!"
Orpheus seized the driver by the collar of his shirt and swung him around like a rag doll until he slammed his face into the side of the Chimera, squashing his skull like a ripe melon. Outside of the Chimera, DeBrain leveled his long las and quickly dispatched one of the wounded Humies. There were so few of them left now. Only two were still on the ground fighting. and both of them aimed and fired at DeBrain. The smart grot tried to dodge out of the way, hiding behind the wreckage of the killer can. But the las blast struck a piece of the can and sent hot shrapnel into DeBrain's leg. But hope was gone for these Humies once the guns inside of the Chimera fell silent. The last remaining Humies lost their courage once again. DeBrain, despite his wound, fired again and brought down one of them. The last remaining Humie dropped his weapon and ran as fast as he could. The orcs were stumbling out of the Chimera and were in no position to catch him. But there was no need to worry about this Humie fleeing and telling the other Humies exactly what he saw at Megahumieopolis. Squigollicus, the trusty Squig hound, poked his head up from his hiding place. He was not a brazen attack Squig that charged recklessly into battle. He usually accompanied commandos or scouts from Wolftree to help them track down enemies. He wasn't a fighter per se, and perhaps a bit of a coward. But chasing down an equally cowardly Humie, well, that was just about his speed. The Squig bounded after the soldier, jumping and biting down hard on his arm, taking him down to the ground and giving him a good shake every time he tried to move. With the last Humie captured, the battle for Megahumieopolis came to an end. Snortius would need to make some difficult choices now that he had conquered Easton and Orcius had successfully commanded the defense of Megahumieopolis. Many had been lost in the glorious victories, but their names would be remembered. At least until the Greenskins became distracted by something else, of course. But they had their two great victories. Would Snortius be able to capitalize on his success? Or will the Humies bring the hammer of the Emperor down upon the fledgling realm of Snortopia? No man do they call me, my mother and my father, and all my comrades as well. Thank you all for listening to the latest episode of Growing the Tribe. If you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a like and a comment below so that one day you too can enjoy the bittersweet taste of victory at great cost. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do so in order to hear more stories about brutal skirmishes between Greenskins and Humies. If you would like to support me, there are links to my Patreon, my PayPal, and my Teespring down below. And if you have absolutely no idea what's going on, you can click on the Growing the Tribe playlist and listen to the story from the beginning, and that should be appearing on screen right now. Thank you all once again for listening. No Man out.